And now joining us on Book TV is author Phillip Magness. He is the co-author with Jason Brennan of this book, Cracks in the Ivory Tower. First of all, Mr. Magness, what do you do for a living?
I am an economist at the American Institute for Economic Research.
Have you been in academia before?
I have. I spent about 10 years teaching college at George Mason University, American University, and Berry College, so all over the United States.
And what was your experience like?
Well, it was an interesting environment, to put it mildly. Many good, positive things that came out of it, both in terms of colleagues that I worked with and the research that I did. But I also got to see kind of the inside, the behind the scenes of what happens in the way that a university runs. And
what did you find?
Well, my immediate take on it is that, you know, if we judged a university just as a normal business operation, there are things that happen in universities that would make something like Enron look ethical by comparison.
Give us an example.
Yeah, I say the first thing is the way that universities market themselves to students. Because if you go to any university in America, you know, they have glossy literature, they present themselves as you're going to get a world-class education and open up all sorts of possibilities. So they're promising high and mighty things that every student that comes through their system is going to get. But when you actually look at the results of what's coming out of the university systems, it's a range of degrees that some of them are not worth the money that you're paying for. So students are leaving with massive amounts of debt, but very little in the way of job prospects. There's often promises that are made that are simply not delivered on, and rather you start seeing university administrators operating in such a way where they're just trying to get more money or more time out of students spent on campus, as opposed to actually delivering an educational product to them.
Has this been an evolving change, in your view, in higher education in America?
Well, I think it's something that it at least goes back to the middle of the last century. The post-World War II era, as higher ed really expanded, although you can find traces of it going back for hundreds of years, if not even a millennium. I mean, one of the anecdotes we tell in the story is Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations in 1776, compared the inefficiencies at Oxford University in England to the Scottish system. And one of the things he pointed out is the professors were lazy, the administrators seemed to be operating in such a way as if they thought there was a continuous cash flow and they really didn't have to deliver anything to the students. Students cheated, they came to class late, really didn't care. So it's a lot of the same patterns that we see 250 years later are still taking place in the university system.
So Phillip Magness, in 2021, is a 4-year college degree necessary for a good job anymore? What does it get you?
Well, I would say that depends quite a bit on the fields. So if you look at the earning returns in certain college degrees, especially like engineering, math, and the STEM fields, the lifetime career earnings is well worth it on getting the college degree. Now, the other end of that, there are some degrees like in theater, drama, poetry, literature, where you start to asking those questions. If you're spending over the course of a 4-year period in excess of $100,000 or $200,000 to go to college, there may not be the type of career path that a person that spends that would be looking for, just because the job market isn't there for those types of degrees.
In your book, Cracks in the Ivory Tower, you talk about general education classes quite a bit. Why?
Right. So gen eds are these classes that everybody takes, and they're roughly about a third of the college experience for the typical student. That's your intro to English, intro to composition, math, biology, all of these things that you're supposed to take to be a well-rounded student, to get a well-rounded education. Unfortunately, over many decades, they've accrued in such a way where a lot of these classes really aren't delivering much in the way of content. And what we do, we look in the book at some survey data where they ask incoming freshmen basic questions about knowledge and critical thinking, and then 2 years later, after the end of their sophomore year, they ask them the same questions, and they find that there's basically no difference in the amount of material that they've learned, no improvement in critical thinking skills. And this is all from the years that most people spend in college taking those gen ed classes. So we ask the question, why are we making students take multiple semesters, spend tens of thousands of dollars taking these mandatory classes for getting a degree, and it turns out they really aren't learning much in those classes. And the answer, it turns out, is that certain departments have figured a way to lobby the curriculum committees and make their classes mandatory as a way of getting students in the seats. And what does that mean? You can hire more faculty, you get more budget for your department. So the English department may be declining in majors overall, but it has hundreds of students coming through its classroom every semester because they're simply required to be there to get a degree in a completely different subject.
Is tenure important in a higher academic? I'm going to ask that again.
So, right.
Let me ask it again. Is tenure important in higher education?
So we have an ideal theory of tenure that says it's an important institution to protect academic freedom, to ensure that faculty are independent, to ensure that the university system can operate as kind of a curator of knowledge. That's the traditional theory of tenure, that it's like a reward to protect intellectual freedom. The functional way that tenure operates in practice, it's often used as almost a nepotistic handout to get your friends in the door and make sure that certain people are hired, but also exclude other people from departments even if they have stronger resumes than some of the candidates that you do hire. So it becomes a very distortive type of a system that has all sorts of incentives. I wouldn't say it's 100% good or 100% bad. One of the things we try to get at in Cracks in the Ivory Tower is to really pay attention to what the incentive structures are that institutions like tenure create. And one of them is it's almost a glut mechanism in the job market. It makes it really hard to hire faculty in certain fields because there's a new entry barrier before a professor is hired into that that particular department, because now you're investing in tenure. That means that you're going to have this person probably as a colleague for decades to come if they accept the offer. That creates a much higher barrier, and one of the results of that is it distorts the job market for educators. And we know anything about higher education, the job market is a complete mess. There are too many PhDs, too many people seeking too few positions in our colleges and universities, and tenure is just one more institution that's holding that up.
What is the American Institute for Economic Research?
American Institute for Economic Research is an independent, nonpartisan research institution based out of Great Barrington, Massachusetts. We work generally in the traditional classical liberal or free market and sound money economic tradition, economics and related fields. Just a team of researchers that produce independent economic indicators and assessments of how the American economy is performing.
Now, you're at Freedom Fest, the Libertarian Convention being held in Rapid City, South Dakota. What's a libertarian approach to improving, changing higher education?
Well, I say we go back to the proposal that Adam Smith first made back in 1776, and that is there needs to be a greater connection between the payers for higher education, i.e. the students, and then the providers, that's both the administration and the faculty. If you connect the payment mechanism to the product that's being preserved and presented to them, you actually have a financial incentive of both parties to improve the educational system. Right now what we have is higher ed is financed through a lot of third-party providers, whether that's the government or student loans, or even something like your parents paying for a student to go to college, but there's really not much of a financial connection between the student and the provider, either in the classroom or the university itself. And what that does is it creates bad incentives to where each of these different players, each of the different stakeholders in the university system are seeking a very different thing from the other, and there's not really any feedback mechanism to say whether faculty are delivering on what they promise, whether the school is delivering the type of degrees that students actually want. So if you go back to Adam Smith, where you have like a payment system that's connected to the actual provision of content, and it's direct between the students and the professors, direct between the students and the administrators, you get some of those incentives re-entered into the equation, and that's the right signals that higher ed can take and adjust what it's providing.
Phillip Magness, in your view, has the U.S. News & World Report college ranking system perverted somewhat our view of higher education?
Well, I think the ranking system was intended originally to be kind of an information queue to allow students and their parents to make decisions of which school they want to go to. Because, you know, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of choices of universities to go to, and we need a basis to compare them. Unfortunately, it's a gameable ranking system. This is something that we see and explore in the book. So, for example, universities, they do things like change some of their course offerings, or what they spend money on, or the ratio of students to professors, because that gets them a higher ranking in the U.S. News and World Report. One of the really egregious ones is the more exclusive a college is. So the more students that they reject, the higher the rejection rate. That can be used to boost their rankings and something like U.S. News and World Report and some of the other systems. Well, what does that mean? Is they actually go out and they encourage students to over-apply to their university, students that they're never intending to take. So Harvard and Princeton and Yale love it when students that are probably not going to get into Harvard, Princeton, and Yale apply, because that adds another rejection and that makes them more exclusive. To me, this is an extremely unethical act, because it's basically wasting people's time, wasting their money, leading them on to something that they're not really going to be offered by that university, and it's all to increase the prestige of the university to game these ranking systems.
What was your college experience, and would you do it differently today?
So I went through a small liberal arts college for undergraduate, and then did graduate school, a PhD at a large public university. Taught at both types of institutions, and you know, I see some similarities, some differences between them. I think if I had done college, I'd offer the same advice that I do to high school students when I talk to them today, is to think about it strategically. Pick a major early on, and pick a major based on what you think is going to be suited to making a career in, not because you're just trying to discover yourself or trying to find excuse me, trying to find a new path or hobby or consumption good in life. In other words, think of the way to get through college efficiently. One thing I would have done in high school, I would have taken more advanced placement classes, continuing or dual credit classes at a local community college to try and knock the general education requirements out of the way. Because what we find is these are one of the major contributors to the cost of college today, is you're spending 1.5 to 2 years of your college experience taking gen ed classes and paying full tuition at them. This is a very heavy expense on students and their parents, but it's something that you can get out of if you start in high school with advanced placement. You start in continuing and dual credit enrollment at the local community college. That means you enter into college with your gen eds out of the way. You can jump right into your major and graduate a year to a year and a half early.
Phillip Magness is a co-author of this book, Cracks in the Ivory Tower, and he's been our guest on Book TV.